Hello folks, this is the Core 3 from FightingGamesOnline.info, and I know it's been almost a year since the last first look, but I am back with a new one, and this one is going over one that's pretty much been in anticipation for a very long time, and I'm very excited to go over this title, and I'm talking about 2XKO. Alright, and so they have basically released a first alpha test for the game. And so what I'm going to do is do what we usually do with First Look, give you the history leading up to this release, what the current alpha build has in the release, do the game's presentation, talk about some game mechanics, and of always, do the online experience. So some of you know this history already if you follow me on this channel, but I still want to go over it if anyone doesn't know about it. So this basically starts with the Cannon brothers, which is Tony and Tom Cannon. Tony created GGPO, which basically is a netcode that used rollback. Nowadays, rollback is widely used today in fighting games as a result of what Tony started with that creation of rollback. Tom Cannon created SRK, a fighting game website, which was a place that competitive fighting game players could communicate and share knowledge. Both the brothers were co-founders of EVO, which is basically considered the Olympics of fighting games. So at some point, the brothers decided to start developing an indie game, and they named the company Radiant Entertainment. The first game, though, was not a fighting game, which kind of sounds crazy, but that's kind of what they decided to do. Now, after completing that game, they went forward with developing a fighting game known as Rising Thunder. It was meant to be a free-to-play game, and they did release an alpha build of the game, and the game stayed in alpha moving into the next year. In March 2016, Radiant Entertainment made an announcement that Riot Games, the creator of League of Legends, was going to acquire the company and the two IPs that had already been created. In addition to that announcement, they also mentioned that Rising Thunder was no longer going to be in development. The next year, they released a community edition of Rising Thunder, where a few dedicated fans have been maintaining the server and currently now have a way to do some modding as well. So let's fast forward to October 2019, where for the first time we got a glimpse of what will become 2XKO. Riot Games was celebrating its 10th anniversary, and as a part of this celebration, they would be releasing games from different genres, all of which were in the League of Legends universe. Placeholder name given at that time was Project L, and two champions were shown in what looked like a traditional ground-based fighting game at the time, similar to Rising Thunder. Fast forward again to August 8th, 2024, and the alpha is now officially upon us. So what we got was 11 days to test the alpha build, and this alpha build contains an online mode with casual lobby, it had a tutorial mode, and a training mode, and they also had 6 characters to play with. So what I decided to do this time was play it on my PC. I have a 2060 paired with a 7800 X3D, and in terms of the settings, right now I was just using the low setting. There was not an option to pick a resolution, but I am assuming that it is choosing my display by default for the graphic. There was also an option to run the game at 120 frames per second, though I decided to just change it to 60 frames per second. And as you can kind of see, with the gameplay that's currently running, you can see that the game does look good. It looks pretty good. I also did do a benchmark, and I did not see anything in terms of the frame rate dropping. So definitely a good sign of it running, well on my system here. So basically, let's just talk a bit about the presentation of the game. When you first started to run the game, the first thing it did was it asked about your skill level. I decided I was going to go ahead and choose the beginner level because I definitely was curious about what what it entailed, but it didn't really seem to really be anything special. Ultimately, it seemed to just be something that maybe the developers were using, and I'll probably talk about that a little bit more going forward. As far as the tutorial, it was kind of basic, only covering certain game mechanics. I'm going to get into that later a little bit more. There are 6 options that you choose during the character select screen, and they did not detail these options in the tutorial, leaving me to believe they were just universal mechanics, and that caused a bit of confusion. So let's talk about the art style for a little bit. Since the game was shown, it has gone through a very big change. It looked a lot more at first like Rising Thunder, but as you can see now, it has more of a shell-shaded look. At first, I wasn't happy with the look, but it has grown on me as they've kept showing the game. The characters do all look very detailed. The animations look amazing. The personalities are really showing through the facial expressions of each character. It really looks like they put a lot of care into making sure that the animations are fluid while still making sure that the controls are also on point as well. So very definitely good, in terms of that art direction. So let's just kind of talk about the gameplay. And there's definitely a lot to go over here. There looks like there's going to be, from what I'm seeing here, it's a mixture of several fighting games, but at the heart is definitely going to be a tag team assist fighting game. So that's definitely at the heart of the game. The game can have up to 4 players. As I was mentioning before, you're going to be given 6 options at the character select screen, and these options are known as fuse, and that's kind of similar to what we've seen in the groove system from Capcom vs. SNK. There is pulse, a fuse that is for beginners, and that gives you the option to mash each attack button to get a full combo. So you can kind of think of that sort of similar to what you have on Dragon Ball FighterZ. Basically, you're getting that with that fuse. The fuse that I personally feel that is most likely becoming the more preferred fuse among pros, especially, is probably freestyle. This gives you access to 2 tags during an assist. So for example, you can start an attack, use an assist, tag in an assist, continue a combo, and if the initial character is still on the screen, you can then tag back into them and then continue your combo. It definitely seems to be similar to what they did with Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. And when I started to see what you could do with this fuse, I knew this was pretty much going to be an immediate favorite because you really have to pay attention to what your opponent is doing. Now, there is a kind of a small caveat to this fuse because the character stays on the screen for a decent period of time. So if you don't protect the character, they can get happy birthday, basically. It can end up being like a happy birthday or, basically causing the character a lot of damage. So that is a downside to this freestyle mechanic, freestyle fuse. The fuse also has a tag mechanic that is similar to Street Fighter X Tekken. I personally use this mechanic for most of the time and just felt a lot more comfortable using this one. The next fuse is called Double Down, and that gives you access to a DHC style super. If you're not familiar with Marvel vs. Capcom, you have the ability to cancel a super move into a teammate super move. I also want to mention that characters do not share super meter in this game, so the damage potential that you can do with this is pretty big because of that. The next fuse was 2x assist, which is basically the traditional assist style that most games have done. It has a smaller cooldown time for assist than the other fuses. Finally, there is Fury, which activates when your character is at 40% of your life gauge. It gives you access to a dash cancel, which I believe works sort of the same way it did in Rising Thunder. Tag team games are traditionally very offensive, but there are some defensive options in this game. There's a burst mechanic which can stop your opponent's offense. There is a universal wake-up reversal mechanic that can push the player back at no cost, though this is very much punishable if it's blocked, just like you would do any sort of reversal. There is also the MVC style push block mechanic, which does cost a bit of meter. Lastly, there is a parry mechanic, which can cost meter to use, but if you can successfully parry an attack, you'll get back the meter and you'll also get a bonus as well. As you can see, there are a lot of mechanics, and one thing I haven't mentioned are the controls for these mechanics. 2XKO does have simplified controls. There are 3 basic attack buttons, and it uses the Magic Series style of combos, which basically allows you to cancel your attacks from light to heavy. You have 2 buttons for special attack, and from the 2 special attacks, you either hold the button or use a direction to get additional special moves. Super moves are activated by pressing down twice on the special button. I'll say the controls are definitely simplified, but because of all the different things you can do in this game, it can get quite complex. I wasn't able to use my joystick with the alpha build and had to stick to joypad, and even with the simplified controls, it definitely put a bit of strain on my left hand especially, which unfortunately has gotten worse over the years. I had to stick to the digital pad because I found that the analog stick had some issues with it. There was like, just a little bit over, kind of too responsive, I guess, in a way, but it just wasn't acting correctly. Aside from one noticeable glitch in the training mode, one thing that I found to be a bit off was throwing. When opponents were in the crouch position, I found that throws would often whiff on wake up. When doing this in the training room, it really didn't happen. I don't know if it was something that I was just kind of, I don't know if it was a mistiming on my part, but I felt like it happened a little too often, enough that I just kind of want to mention that. Of course, we got to talk about the online experience. The virtual lobby was definitely a little bit different than what I usually see in virtual lobbies. I had the usual, it did have the usual arcade cabinet layout, but it did add some couch style areas, which I thought was a nice touch. It had an option of you either going up to the unit to wait for a match or just immediately searching for a match and being placed at a unit to play with somebody. The most unique feature of that lobby had to be the way that you could watch matches. By just standing in the area of a match, a small screen would pop up and then you would just have the ability to make it larger, but you couldn't do a full screen. There's also an area where the match can be always seen on screen, so I thought that was an interesting touch as well. I unfortunately did not get the opportunity to team up with anyone. That was probably my fault, but I just really didn't take the time to look into how to make that happen. As far as online play goes, the experience was pretty good. It really shouldn't have to be said, but we all know that this is using Robat netcode. So in most of the matches I played, the connection was pretty good. Not a great deal of noticeable lag spike. I did notice that it mainly happened when someone was watching the match, but outside of that, it was not as frequent. Even when I was playing against people who were in the team, it didn't feel like much of a difference either. They did have each player's ping and rollback frame information up on the screen, though you could barely see it, and it seems to be showing the ping connected to their server, which makes me wonder if they are using a relay server instead of a direct peer-to-peer server. I didn't get the feeling that there was any sort of matchmaking in place, though the devs did mention that they are monitoring how well we are doing when we play the game, and that can kind of affect the lobby that we get placed into. Overall, I did have a good time playing 2XKO, but there's definitely a lot to unpack with this game. Even with the simplified controls, it still takes a lot of execution to break that fourth wall of gameplay. So definitely don't expect this to be easy at all, even with the simplified controls. I basically just have the usual complaint, which is a tutorial. I do expect that they're going to have something a lot more detailed, but it's my feeling that first impressions are important and they should have really put a little bit more effort into that. I'm under the impression that there are a few players that are coming from League of Legends or Valorant, and having a tutorial there to really help get players acclimated to fighting games is important in my opinion. Given this may be the first experience someone has with fighting games, you only really get one chance to make a good impression. And while the game looks great, if frustration sets in, then they may never want to deal with it again. From what I understand, they're estimating that they will release the game sometime around summer of 2025. If I'm correct, this game is going to be free to play, just like the other Riot games. It's really hard to say just how well this game is going to do. I think the League of Legends has enough characters that it could definitely keep the interest going. As I know, it's probably going to be like by seasonal type of thing, but definitely got to see. So that's pretty much it for my first look. I am hoping that SNK is going to have a beta for the City of the Wolves before the end of the year. And if I do get my hands on it, then there's definitely going to be another first look. So stay tuned.